Commander Vexstar stood frozen in place as he watched Tae-young continue his impossible assault on the space station. The boy's single ship danced through the defensive fire like it was performing some kind of deadly ballet. Every movement was precise and purposeful, showing a level of skill that should have taken decades to develop. "How does he do it?" Vexstar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question was directed at Captain Lee, but it was really more of a desperate plea for understanding. Captain Lee looked genuinely surprised by the alien commander's obvious distress. "Do what, Commander? It's just pattern recognition and strategic thinking. Human children are naturally good at these kinds of games. They have quick reflexes and can process multiple variables simultaneously." Games. Vexstar repeated the word like it was some kind of curse. "These are not games, Captain. These are military simulations of the highest order. I have seen experienced officers from dozens of species struggle with scenarios less complex than what this child is handling well." "Yes," the captain admitted, looking somewhat confused. "But they're still games to the children. They enjoy the challenge and competition. It helps them develop problem-solving skills that will be useful throughout their lives." Vexstar studied the simulation display more carefully, trying to understand what he was really seeing. The physics engine was incredibly sophisticated, modeling everything from gravitational effects to energy weapon dispersion patterns. The tactical scenarios were based on real historical battles from across the galaxy, including some conflicts that were classified at the highest levels. This was not some simple entertainment program designed to keep children occupied. This was a comprehensive military training system that would challenge even the most experienced fleet commanders. And human children were mastering it as easily as other species might play with simple toys. The boy on the screen had successfully destroyed the space station's main weapon systems and was now systematically eliminating the remaining defensive platforms. His ship moved with mechanical precision, striking each target and moving to the next. Before the enemy could respond, Hien approached Vexstar with her datapad in hand. "Commander," she said quietly, "I have been analyzing the tactical algorithms used in this simulation. They are more advanced than anything in our military databases. The scenarios include strategic elements that our own war colleges do not teach until the final year of officer training." "This child is 8 years old," Vexstar said grimly. 8 years old and playing these games for entertainment, Dr. Hien confirmed. Her voice carried a note of fear that made Vexstar's stomach twist with anxiety. Tae-young had completed his solo assault on the space station and was now selecting a new scenario. The screen changed to show what appeared to be a planetary invasion. The boy now commanded ground forces, air support, and orbital bombardment assets in a complex multi-dimensional battle. Vexstar watched in growing horror as the child began coordinating attacks across multiple fronts simultaneously. The boy managed supply lines, directed airstrikes, and coordinated ground assaults with the same calm efficiency he had shown in the space battles. Captain Lee noticed the alien commander's distress and tried to offer reassurance. "You must understand, Commander, that these games are very popular throughout human space. Every child plays them from a very young age. It's considered an important part of their education and development." Every child. Vexstar felt his legs grow weak. "Every human child receives this level of tactical training, of course," Captain Lee said, "as if it were the most natural thing in the world. How else would they learn to protect themselves? Space is a dangerous place full of pirates, hostile aliens, and natural disasters. Our children need to be prepared for anything they might encounter." Vexstar began to understand the true scope of what he was witnessing. This was not just about one gifted child or even one ship full of colonists. This was about an entire species that raised their young to think like military strategists from the moment they could understand complex concepts. Human children were learning to see conflict as a puzzle to be solved rather than a horror to be avoided. The implications were staggering. If every human child received this kind of training, then humanity possessed a depth of tactical expertise that no other species could match. They were not just producing individual military geniuses, they were creating an entire civilization of strategic thinkers. Sub-Commander Krill moved closer to Vexstar and whispered urgently, "Commander, if their children are this skilled, what must their adult military officers be capable of?" Vexstar did not want to think about that question, but he could not avoid The humans had already demonstrated their military capabilities by defeating 3 separate alien invasions in the past century. Each time they had been outnumbered and outgunned, yet they had emerged victorious. Now he was beginning to understand how they had accomplished such impossible victories. It was not just their technology or their courage, although those were certainly factors, it was their culture. Every human was trained from childhood to think tactically, to analyze complex situations, and to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Young Tae-young had moved on to yet another scenario, this time commanding an entire fleet in a massive space battle involving thousands of ships on each side. The complexity was mind-boggling, with multiple theaters of operation, resource management, and strategic objectives, all requiring simultaneous attention. The boy handled it all with the same calm confidence he had shown in the earlier simulations. His small fingers moved across the control interface with practiced ease as he directed the flow of battle across dozens of different fronts. "What happens when these children grow up?" Vexstar asked quietly. Captain Lee smiled with obvious pride. "They become the finest officers in the galaxy, Commander. Our military academies are always impressed by how well prepared our young people are when they enlist. Many of them are ready for command positions within just a few years of joining the service." Vexstar felt a chill run down his spine as he imagined thousands of officers with tactical skills like young Tae-young commanding fleets across human space. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Dr. Hien was still taking notes, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Commander," she said, "I think we need to reconsider our evaluation of human military capabilities. Based on what we are seeing here, their potential for warfare far exceeds anything in our previous assessments." The alien commander nodded slowly. He was beginning to realize that humanity's request to join the Galactic Council was not just about trade agreements and diplomatic relations. It was about the future balance of power in the galaxy, and sitting in front of them, playing what he called a simple game, was a small boy who might represent either the greatest hope or the greatest threat that civilized space had ever encountered. That evening, Commander Vexstar met with his 3 officers in the small quarters that had been assigned to them on the human ship. The room was cramped and barely large enough for the 4 aliens, but it provided privacy for the conversation they desperately needed to have. Sub-Commander Krill was pacing back and forth, his usual nervous energy amplified by what he had witnessed during the day. "Commander," he said, his voice trembling with barely controlled fear, "I have been observing the human children all day. Their capabilities are beyond anything we have seen in our own military academies." "I know," Vexstar replied grimly as he settled into one of the uncomfortable chairs. "What disturbs me most is that they see it as entertainment. They genuinely enjoy these simulations." Dr. Hien pulled up data on her portable display screen and began showing the others her analysis. "I have been studying the human games in detail," she said. "The physics engines are completely accurate, the tactical scenarios are based on real historical battles, and the strategic complexity rivals anything taught in our most advanced war college's communications." Officer Zek, who had been quiet throughout most of the day, finally spoke up. "I have been monitoring human communications networks," he said quietly. "The games we observe today are not unique to this ship. They are standard throughout human space. Millions of children across hundreds of worlds are playing identical simulations." Millions, Vexstar felt his heart skip a beat. Millions of human children are receiving this level of tactical training. "That's not the worst part," Zek continued. "I intercepted transmissions from human military academies. Their instructors are constantly amazed by how well prepared their new recruits are. Most human children arrive at military school already possessing tactical skills that would take other species years to develop." Vexter stood up and began pacing the small room, himself trying to process the full implications of what they had discovered. "We came here to evaluate whether humans were suitable for council membership," he said. "But I fear we have discovered something far more significant." "What do you mean, Commander?" Dr. Hien asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Think about it," Vexstar said, his forearms gesturing anxiously. "Every human child plays these games. Millions of them across hundreds of worlds. They are creating a generation of tactical geniuses, each one capable of commanding fleets and winning battles against impossible odds." The room fell silent as the full horror of the situation sank in. They were not just looking at a species that had won a few military victories against overwhelming odds, they were looking at a civilization that was systematically training every single child to think like a military strategist. Krill stopped pacing and turned to face the others. But they seem peaceful, he protested. They want to join the council to work with U.S. in cooperation and harmony for now, Vexstar said darkly. But what happens if that changes? What happens if someone threatens their children, their worlds, their way of life? They all knew the answer. Humanity would fight back with a level of tactical sophistication that would make their previous victories look like minor skirmishes. They would not just have professional soldiers and trained officers, they would have an entire civilization of strategic thinkers all working together toward a common goal. The Archean brought up more data on her display. I have been analyzing human military history, she said. The pattern is always the same. They face impossible odds, they are outnumbered and outgunned, but they always find a way to win because they think differently, Vexstar said quietly. Other species see war as a terrible necessity to be avoided. Whenever possible, humans see it as a complex puzzle to be solved. They approach every conflict with the same analytical mindset that their children use in those games. Zek accessed his communication logs and showed them to the others. I have been reviewing human entertainment media, he said. Their stories, their movies, their games all focus on scenarios where the heroes face overwhelming odds and win through superior tactics and strategy. It's their entire culture. Krill realized with growing alarm, they don't just train their children to be warriors. They train them to be strategic thinkers who can find victory in any situation, no matter how hopeless it appears. Vexstar sat back down heavily in his chair. The weight of their discovery was almost overwhelming. They had come to evaluate a simple request for council membership, but instead they had uncovered what might be the most significant military threat the galaxy had ever faced. But the most terrifying part was that it was not really a threat at all. The humans were not preparing for conquest or domination. They were simply raising their children the way they thought was best, preparing them for a dangerous galaxy full of pirates, hostile aliens, and natural disasters. The fact that this preparation also made them incredibly dangerous was almost certainly unintentional. The humans genuinely seemed to want peace and cooperation. They were not trying to intimidate anyone or demonstrate their military superiority, but the reality was that they possessed tactical capabilities that dwarfed every other species in the galaxy combined, and they were completely unaware of how terrifying this made them to other civilizations. Commander Dr. Heian said quietly. What are we going to tell the Council? Vexter was quiet for a long moment, considering their options carefully. They could recommend that the Council reject humanity's membership application, citing concerns about their military capabilities, but that would likely make the humans suspicious and potentially hostile. Could recommend acceptance, but warn the Council about humanity's tactical abilities. But that information might leak and cause other species to take preemptive action against human space. Or they could recommend acceptance and hope that humanity's desire for peace and cooperation was genuine and permanent. The problem was that they were not really making a decision about one species, they were making a decision about the future balance of power in the galaxy. If they accepted humanity into the Council, they would be aligning themselves with what was probably the most militarily capable species that had ever existed. If they rejected humanity, they would be creating a potential enemy that could probably defeat the entire Galactic Council in open warfare. It was not really a choice at all. Commander Vexstar could not tear his eyes away from young Tae-young as the boy continued to play his Starship simulator. The alien commander had seen many battles in his long military career, but he had never witnessed anything quite like this. The child was facing impossible odds, yet he showed no fear or hesitation. The screen displayed a new scenario that made Vexstar's blood run cold. The boy now commanded a small fleet of only 20 ships while facing an enemy armada of over 1,000 vessels. The red dots on the tactical display swarmed like angry insects around the tiny cluster of blue ships that represented the human forces. Any rational military commander would immediately surrender or attempt to negotiate, Vexstar thought. To himself, there was simply no way such a small force could survive against such overwhelming numbers. It would be better to save the lives of the crews rather than waste them in a hopeless battle. But young Tae-young did not surrender. Instead, he began studying the enemy formation with the same intense concentration that Vexstar had seen professional tacticians use when planning major military campaigns. The boy's small fingers hovered over the control panel as he considered his options. The child will surely give up now, Vexstar whispered to Sub-Commander Krill, who was standing beside him watching the screen with equal fascination. No intelligent being would continue such a hopeless fight, but they were both wrong. Tae-young suddenly began moving his ships in a pattern that made absolutely no sense to the alien observers. The boy divided his already tiny fleet into 4 even smaller groups, sending them racing away from each other in different directions. This is madness, Krill muttered under his breath. He is making his situation even worse by splitting his forces. Captain Lee stood nearby watching the game with obvious pride and satisfaction. Tae-young is one of our most creative young players, he said warmly. His strategies are always unpredictable and innovative. Vexstar wanted to point out that unpredictable and innovative were not good qualities when they led to certain defeat, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Instead, he watched as the enemy fleet began to react to the boy's movements. The commander of the red ships clearly thought the same thing as Vexstar. The enemy forces immediately began pursuing the scattered human vessels, confident that they could easily destroy the divided fleet. The 1,000 enemy ships split into 4 large groups, each one chasing after one of the boy's small squadrons. For several minutes it looked like the pursuit would end exactly as expected. The enemy forces were faster and more numerous than the human ships, and they were steadily closing the distance, but then something extraordinary happened. Tae-young had led the enemy fleets into a carefully planned trap. The boy had positioned his ships near a dense asteroid field, and when the pursuing forces got close enough, he suddenly changed course. His ships dove into the asteroid field, using the floating rocks as cover and obstacles. The enemy commanders tried to follow, but their large formations were too clumsy to navigate through the narrow spaces between the asteroids. Many of the red ships collided with the rocks or with each other as they tried to maintain their pursuit, while the enemy was struggling with the asteroids. Tae-young's ships emerged from hiding and began attacking. The boy had somehow managed to position his forces so that each of his small squadrons was attacking a different enemy group from an unexpected angle. Battle that had seemed hopeless just minutes before suddenly began to turn in favor of the human forces. The enemy ships, caught off guard and disorganized by their chaotic pursuit through the asteroid field, found themselves under attack from multiple directions. At once Vexstar watched in growing amazement as the boy's tactical genius became clear. Tae-young had not been running away or making desperate moves. He had been executing a complex plan that required perfect timing and precise coordination. The child had anticipated exactly how the enemy would react and had prepared for every possibility. Within 20 minutes, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The 1,000 enemy ships that had seemed so threatening were now scattered and demoralized. Many had been destroyed by the asteroids or by friendly fire as they collided with each other. In their confusion, the boys' 20 ships methodically hunted down the remaining enemy forces, striking at weak points and avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. It was a masterpiece of tactical planning executed with surgical precision. How is this possible? Vexstar asked Captain Lee, his voice filled with disbelief. How can a child of 8 years old display such sophisticated military thinking? Captain Lee shrugged as if the question was not particularly interesting. All human children learn to think strategically, he explained. It's part of their education and development. They start with simple games when they are very young and gradually work up to more complex scenarios, but these are not games, Vexstar protested. These are advanced military simulations that would challenge experienced officers from any species. The captain looked genuinely confused by the alien's distress. Of course they are realistic, he said. That's what makes them educational. If the games were too simple, the children would not learn anything useful. Dr. Hien had been taking notes throughout the entire battle, and now she leaned close to Vexstar. Commander, she whispered urgently, I have been analyzing the tactical patterns used by this child. His strategies are more sophisticated than anything taught in our military academies. Vexstar nodded grimly. He was beginning to understand that the human request to join the Galactic Council might be far more significant than anyone had realized. These were not Simple, peaceful colonists looking for protection and trade opportunities, these were a species that trained their children to be military geniuses young. Tae-young had finished his battle and was now starting a new scenario. The screen showed a different type of challenge. This time, the boy commanded a single small ship facing a massive space station surrounded by defensive platforms and swarms of fighter craft. Once again, the odds were hopeless. Once again, any sane commander would retreat or call for reinforcements, and once again, the 8-year-old human child attacked without hesitation. Vexstar found himself holding his breath as he watched the boy's ship dive toward the enemy station. The child flew in a spiraling pattern that seemed random but was actually carefully calculated to avoid the worst of the defensive fire. When the station's fighters launched to intercept him, Tae-young did something that made Vexstar's eyes widen in shock. The boy led the pursuing fighters directly through the station's own defensive fire. The automated weapon systems could not distinguish between friend and foe and began shooting down the station's own fighters. It was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely terrifying to watch. The child was using the enemy's own weapons against them with a level of tactical sophistication that would have impressed the greatest military minds in the galaxy. As the boy's ship continued its attack run, weaving between explosions and laser fire, Vexstar realized something that made his blood run cold. This was not just one exceptionally gifted child. This was apparently normal for human children. If they all received this kind of training from such a young age, then humanity possessed a military potential that dwarfed every other species in the galaxy. The implications were staggering, and Vexstar was not sure whether he should recommend that the Council accept humanity as members or declare them a threat to galactic peace. As the day went on, Commander Vexstar found himself drawn to observe more human children at play throughout the massive colony ship. What he discovered made his growing concern turn into outright alarm. Every child he watched displayed the same frightening level of tactical sophistication that had stunned him in young Tae-young. In one section of the ship, he found a girl named Park So-young, who appeared to be no more than 10 years old. She was hunched over a different type of simulation console, managing what looked like a complex economic system. The screen showed multiple star systems connected by trade routes with resources flowing between planets and space stations. At first glance, it seemed like a harmless educational game about commerce and trade, but as Vexstar watched more carefully, he realized that the girl was actually running a wartime economy under constant attack. Enemy raiders were striking at supply convoys and trying to disrupt the flow of critical material. So-young handled each crisis with remarkable skill. When pirates attacked a supply convoy, she rerouted other shipments to cover the shortfall. When enemy forces blockaded a key manufacturing world, she found alternative sources for the same materials. Her solutions were elegant and efficient, showing a grasp of logistics that would impress seasoned quartermaster officers. Commander Krill joined Vexstar in watching the girl play. "How old did you say she was?" he asked in amazement. 10 years old, Vexstar replied grimly, and she is managing resource allocation for an entire sector of space while under constant military pressure. The girl noticed them watching and smiled brightly. "Would you like to try?" she asked politely. "It's really fun once you understand how all the systems work together." Vexstar felt his throat go dry. "Fun," she called it. Fun. This child was casually managing economic warfare scenarios that would challenge senior staff officers, and she thought it was entertaining. In another area of the ship, he found a boy named Choi Woo-jin, who was playing what appeared to be a diplomatic negotiation game. The screen showed representatives from different alien species sitting around a conference table while the boy controlled the human diplomat. But as Vexstar listened to the conversations, he quickly realized that this was not a simple lesson in peaceful diplomacy. The boy was actually learning psychological warfare, studying how to manipulate other species through careful use of threats, incentives, and emotional pressure. Woo-jin would offer trade agreements that seemed generous but contained hidden clauses that favored human interests. He would make threats that sounded like friendly warnings, and he would use each species' cultural weaknesses against them in subtle ways. The most disturbing part was how good the boy was at it. He seemed to understand the psychology of dozens of different alien species better than most professional diplomats. The child was learning to fight wars with words and ideas rather than weapons, and the results were just as devastating. Dr. Hien approached Vexstar with her datapad clutched tightly in her hands. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fear, "I have been observing the human children all day. Their capabilities are beyond anything we have seen in our own military academies." "I know," Vexstar replied, his own voice heavy with dread. "What disturbs me most is that they see it as entertainment. They genuinely enjoy these simulations. But it's not just individual talent," Dr. Hien continued. "They are all learning to work together as a team. I watched a group of 6 children coordinate a complex multi-phase military operation that involved space battles, ground combat, economic warfare, and diplomatic manipulation. They handled it like it was a fun group activity." Vexter felt his stomach twist as he absorbed this information. It was bad enough that human children were individual tactical geniuses, but if they were also learning to coordinate their efforts, then humanity possessed a military potential that was truly terrifying. He watched as young Tae-young was joined by 2 other children, a girl named Kim Min-seo, who appeared to be about 6 years old, and another boy named Lee Jae-ho, who looked to be around 9. The 3 of them began working together on a massive simulation that involved multiple fleets fighting across several star systems. Each child took responsibility for different aspects of the operation. Tae-young commanded the main battle fleet. Min-seo managed logistics and supply lines, while Jae-ho handled intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. Their coordination was flawless, with each child anticipating what the others needed before they even asked. The most shocking thing was how young Min-seo was. Only 6 years old, and she was managing supply chains and resource allocation for an entire military campaign. Her small fingers moved across the control interface with practiced ease as she directed the flow of ammunition, fuel, and spare parts to where they were needed most. Captain Lee approached the group of alien observers with a proud smile on his face. "Aren't they wonderful?" he said warmly. "Those 3 have been playing together since they were toddlers. They work as a team better than most adult officers." 6 years old, Vexstar whispered, staring at little Min-seo. "She is only 6 years old, and she is running military logistics well?" "Yes," Captain Lee said, looking puzzled by the alien's obvious distress. "She's very bright for her age. Her parents are both supply officers, so she's grown up around these kinds of systems." Vexstar turned to look at the human captain with new eyes. "Captain Lee," he said slowly, "these children are not simply playing games. They are receiving advanced military training that would challenge the best officers in the galaxy." The human looked genuinely confused by this observation. "Training, Commander? No, they are just having fun. These games are popular throughout human space. Every child plays them. Every child." Vexstar felt faint again. "Every human child receives this level of tactical education." "Of course," Captain Lee said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "How else would they learn to protect themselves? The galaxy is full of dangers, and our children need to be prepared for anything." Vexstar began to understand the true scope of what he was witnessing. This was not just about a few gifted children or even one colony ship. This was about an entire species that had fundamentally different ideas about childhood education and preparation for adult life, while other species focused on teaching their young art, music, literature, and basic academic subjects. Humans were teaching their children to think like generals, admirals, and strategic planners from the moment they could understand complex concepts. Human children were learning to see every problem as a tactical challenge to be solved. The implications were staggering. If every human child received this kind of training, then humanity possessed a depth of military expertise that no other species could match. They were not just producing individual military geniuses, they were creating an entire civilization of strategic thinkers, and the most terrifying part was that they saw it as completely normal. They thought this was just how children should be raised. Commander Vexstar stepped out of his small shuttle and looked around the huge human ship with wide eyes. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides as he tried to take in everything he was seeing. The ship, called New Sol, was bigger than anything he had ever been on before. The metal walls stretched up so high he could barely see the ceiling, and the corridors were wide enough for 10 of his people to walk. Side by side behind him walked his 3 officers, Sub-Commander Krill, who was always nervous about everything, Science Officer Dr. Hien, who wrote down every single detail she saw, and communications officer Zek, who could speak 12 different alien languages. The four of them had traveled across half the galaxy to get here, and now they were finally meeting the humans who wanted to join the Galactic Council. Captain Lee Byung-ho was waiting for them at the docking bay. The human was tall and strong, looking with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes that showed he had seen many difficult things in his life. He wore a dark blue uniform with shiny metal pieces on his chest and shoulders. When he saw the alien visitors, he smiled and bowed his head in a respectful way. "Welcome aboard, Commander," the human captain said in a warm voice that made Vexstar feel a little more comfortable. "We are very honored that you and your officers have come so far to visit." U.S. Vexter nodded back and tried to remember everything he had learned about human customs. The humans were strange creatures who looked similar to several other species but had some very unusual habits. They showed their teeth when they were happy, which looked threatening to most aliens. They also liked to touch each other with their hands as a sign of friendship, which made many species very uncomfortable. "Thank you for inviting us," Captain Lee Vexstar replied carefully. "We have come to learn about your people and decide if you are ready to join our council." Captain Lee's smile got even bigger. "I understand completely, Commander. Please let me show you around our ship and introduce you to our people. I think you will find humans very interesting." They walked through the ship. Vexstar noticed something that made him feel worried. Children were running everywhere. The small humans laughed and played games as they raced through corridors that were full of dangerous military equipment. There were weapons mounted on the walls and computer screens showing battle information, but the children acted like they were in a safe playground. This was very different from other species Vexstar had visited. Most civilized races kept their young ones far away from anything that could hurt them. Children were supposed to be protected and kept safe until they were old enough to take care of themselves, but these human children seemed perfectly happy to be surrounded by tools of warrior. "Offspring appear quite comfortable in this environment," Vexstar said to Captain Lee, trying to sound polite instead of worried. Captain Lee looked around at the children playing, and his face showed pride and love. "Children adapt quickly to new situations," he explained. "They see this ship as their home, not as a weapon. They have been living here for 3 years as we travel to our new colony world, but this is a military vessel," Vexstar pointed out. "There are weapons and defense systems everywhere. Is it safe for the young ones to be here?" "Oh, yes, very safe," Captain Lee said with confidence. "Our children know how to behave around dangerous equipment. They are taught from a very young age to be careful and responsible. Besides, they enjoy learning about how the ship works." Dr. Hien was writing down everything she heard and saw. She whispered to Vexstar, "Commander, this is highly unusual. Most species would never allow children near military technology." Vexstar nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. He was starting to understand that humans might be more different from other species than anyone had realized. The reports about their military victories were already concerning, but seeing how they raised their children was even more puzzling. They passed through a large recreational area where many humans were relaxing and talking. In one corner, a small boy sat hunched over a glowing computer console. The child looked like he was only about 8 years old, but he was completely focused on whatever was on his screen. His small fingers moved across the control buttons with surprising speed and skill. "What is the child doing?" Vexstar asked, feeling genuinely curious about the boy's intense concentration. "Playing a Starship simulator," Captain Lee replied as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "It's educational and helps them learn about space, navigation, and tactical thinking." Vexstar felt a cold chill run down his spine. The words tactical thinking echoed in his mind. Among his own people, military tactics were only taught to professional soldiers who had trained for many years. The idea of a child learning such things seemed both innocent and deeply disturbing. Boy's name was Kim Tae-young, and he was completely absorbed in his game. The screen showed a complex 3-dimensional star map with hundreds of small moving objects. Some were colored blue and others were red. The red ones seemed to outnumber the blue ones by a huge amount. Commander Krill moved closer to get a better look at the screen. "Commander," he whispered urgently, "this appears to be a sophisticated military simulation, not a simple children's game." Captain Lee overheard and laughed. "It's just a game that helps kids learn problem-solving skills. Tae-young here is one of our best young players," his father Kim Dongwu is our chief tactical officer. The boy has been playing these games since he could barely walk. Vexstar watched the screen more carefully and felt his worry growing. The simulation was showing a space battle with the blue ships heavily outnumbered by the red ones. In any real military situation, a commander would either call for reinforcements or retreat from such impossible odds, but the child showed no signs of giving up. Instead, young Taeyong began moving his ships in patterns that made no sense to the alien commander. The boy split his already small fleet into even smaller groups, sending them in different directions. It looked like he was making the situation even worse by dividing his forces. This is suicide tactics, Vexstar thought to himself. No trained officer would make such a foolish decision, but something strange began to happen on the screen. The enemy red ships, confident in their overwhelming numbers, started chasing after the scattered blue ships. As they spread out to pursue their targets, gaps began to appear in their formation. Suddenly, Taeyong's ships changed direction. The small blue groups that had seemed to be running away now converged on the weak points in the enemy formation. They struck with devastating precision, hitting the red ships where they were most vulnerable. Within just a few minutes, the battle that had seemed hopeless began to turn in favor of the blue ships. The enemy fleet, caught completely off guard by the unconventional tactics, started to fall apart. Ship after ship was destroyed as the boy continued his relentless assault. Vexstar watched in growing horror as the 8-year-old child systematically destroyed forces that should have overwhelmed him. The boy's face remained calm and peaceful as he orchestrated the virtual slaughter. There was no excitement or bloodthirsty joy, just focused concentration, like someone solving a difficult puzzle. How does he do it? Vexstar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain Lee looked surprised by the question. Do what, Commander? It's just pattern recognition and strategic thinking. Human children are naturally good at these kinds of games. Games, Vexstar repeated, his 4 eyes widening in shock. These are not games, Captain. These are military simulations of the highest order. Well, yes, the captain admitted, looking a bit confused. But they're still games to the children. They enjoy the challenge, and it helps them develop important thinking skills. Vexstar studied the simulation more carefully. Now the physics looked accurate, the weapon systems appeared realistic, and the tactical scenarios seemed to be based on actual historical battles. This wasn't a simple entertainment program designed to keep children busy. This was a sophisticated training system that would challenge even experienced military officers, and an 8-year-old human child was mastering it like it was nothing more than a fun way to spend his afternoon. The next morning, Commander Vexstar requested a final private meeting with Captain Lee. Byung-ho, they stood together in the ship's main observation deck, looking out through the massive transparent aluminum windows at the starfield beyond. The view was breathtaking, with thousands of distant suns creating a tapestry of light against the black void of space. Captain Vexstar began, carefully choosing his words with great care. I must ask you something important about your people. Your military capabilities are impressive. Some might even say they are frightening. What assurance can you give the Galactic Council that humanity will use these abilities responsibly? Captain Lee was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face reflecting the starlight as he considered the question. You have spent time with our children, Commander, he said finally. What did you observe when you watched them play? I saw young tactical geniuses learning to wage war through games, Vexstar replied honestly. Yes, the captain agreed, nodding slowly. But did you see them enjoying the violence? Did you see them celebrating the destruction of their enemies? Did you see them taking pleasure in the suffering of others? Vexstar thought about this carefully throughout his observations. He had indeed noticed something that puzzled him. The children approached the military simulations with the same attitude they might bring to solving a complex mathematical equation. They were focused on the intellectual challenge, not on the destruction and death. They treated it as a puzzle, he said slowly, beginning to understand exactly. Captain Lee nodded with satisfaction. Humans fight when we must, Commander, but we take no pleasure in it. We prepare for war so thoroughly, precisely because we want to preserve peace. Our children learn these tactical skills not because we love conflict, but because we love our families and want to protect them. But your capabilities are so far beyond other species, Vexstar protested. What happens when you encounter a problem that cannot be solved through superior tactics? What happens when diplomacy fails and peaceful solutions are impossible? Then we fight, Captain Lee said simply and without hesitation. But we fight to end the conflict as quickly as possible with the minimum necessary force. We do not fight for conquest or glory or revenge, we fight to protect what we value most. And if the Council accepts humanity's membership, Vexstar asked, what would that mean for the galaxy, Captain? Lee's expression grew more serious. Then you will have the most capable allies in the galaxy, he said firmly. We will defend Council space as fiercely as we defend our own worlds. Our children will grow up seeing alien species not as potential enemies, but as extended family to be protected. The human captain gestured toward the observation window, where the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Look out there, Commander, he said. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but it is also full of dangers. There are hostile forces that threaten all civilized species. Pirates, raiders, fanatics who would destroy everything we have built. Vexstar knew this was true. The galaxy was indeed a dangerous place. The Galactic Council maintained peace through careful diplomacy and the threat of collective action, but there were always those who chose violence over cooperation. If humanity joins the Council, Captain Lee continued, we will bring our tactical expertise to bear against those threats. We will use our abilities to protect peaceful civilizations and preserve the stability that allows art, science, and culture to flourish. But what if the Council makes decisions that humanity disagrees with? Vexstar asked, what if our interests conflict with yours? Then we will debate and discuss and find compromise, Captain Lee said without hesitation. That is what civilized beings do, Commander. We will not always agree, but we will work together to find solutions that benefit everyone. Vexstar studied the human captain, carefully trying to read his intentions and motivations. Everything he had observed suggested that humanity was indeed committed to peaceful cooperation. They wanted to join the galactic community, not conquer it, but the tactical capabilities he had witnessed in their children were so overwhelming that the temptation to use them for aggressive purposes would be enormous. Many species would be unable to resist the urge to expand their territory or impose their will on weaker neighbors. Yet the humans seemed genuinely different. Their culture emphasized protection over conquest, defense over offense. They trained their children to be strategic thinkers, not because they wanted to wage war, but because they wanted to be prepared for any threat. Commander Vexstar made his decision. That afternoon he transmitted his report to the Galactic Council using the ship's communication array. His recommendation was clear and unambiguous. The Council should immediately accept humanity's request for membership, but he also included a private encrypted message for the Council leadership that outlined his true assessment of the situation. Humanity represents both the greatest opportunity and the greatest threat our civilization has ever encountered. He wrote, their children possess tactical abilities that surpass our finest generals and admirals. They are creating a generation of strategic thinkers whose capabilities are beyond anything we have previously imagined. We have two choices, he continued. We can accept them as allies and benefit from their protection and expertise, or we can reject them and face the possibility of having the most militarily capable species in the galaxy as our enemies. The choice is obvious. We must ensure that humanity remains our friend because we simply cannot afford to make them our enemy. 3 days later, the response came back from the Council. The vote had been unanimous. Humanity would be accepted as a full member of the Galactic Council with all the rights and responsibilities that membership entailed. Captain Lee received the news with quiet satisfaction and genuine happiness. His people had achieved their goal of joining the galactic community. They would now have access to advanced technologies, trade opportunities, and the protection of the Council's collective defense agreements. Young Tae-young was still playing his Starship simulator when the announcement was made. The boy had moved on to an even more complex scenario involving multiple star systems and millions of individual units. He handled it all with the same calm efficiency that had first caught Commander Vexstar's attention. The child had no idea that his innocent game had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The tactical genius he displayed while playing had convinced the alien observers that humanity was too valuable as an ally and too dangerous as an enemy to be rejected. As Commander Vexstar prepared to depart the human ship, he took one last look at the children playing their games. They were laughing and having fun, completely unaware that they represented the future of galactic civilization. They were just children playing games, but they were also the most tactically sophisticated young minds the galaxy had ever produced, and they were growing up in a culture that valued peace, cooperation, and the protection of innocent life. The galaxy was about to become a much safer place.